A leak has just exposed the terrifying reason Red Bull's 2026 engine could flip the grid upside down. And it's not what the paddock expected. Instead of chasing a software trick or electrical bypass, Red Bull's power unit is built around a mechanical phenomenon. The FIA can't directly ban thermal piston expansion that boosts compression ratios mid-race. It's legal. It's invisible. And it's terrifying. Rival teams like Ferrari and Audi are now flooding the FIA with urgent protests, demanding a last-minute ban. Because if the FIA doesn't intervene before January, Red Bull's engine becomes locked in for the next 4 years. And the rest of the grid will be left chasing a ghost. On the surface, the FIA maintains its stance. The 2026 regulations are clear, fair, and engineered to prevent any one team from running away with the championship. But beneath that calm exterior, the mood is shifting in fast. The leak that's now circulating inside power unit departments isn't just triggering curiosity. It's triggering fear. Because the data doesn't show an illegal engine. It shows a legal one that behaves in ways the FIA never anticipated, and that's a far more dangerous problem. The governing body can't protest what it doesn't define, and Red Bull may have built their entire concept around that exact blind spot. The leaked data appears to come from early-stage homologation exchanges documents teams are required to submit as part of the 2026 preparation cycle. Normally, these datasets are kept highly confidential. But what was seen possibly by accident has sparked a full-scale scramble behind the scenes. According to engineers familiar with the data, Red Bull's engine isn't defined by electric power surges or fuel injection tricks. It's defined by mechanical behavior under thermal stress. More specifically, a system that gains efficiency as its internal temperatures rise without breaching any fuel flow or MGUK limits. That alone has stunned rival teams. Ferrari, for instance, is reportedly re-evaluating their entire 2026 power unit layout in response. Because if Red Bull's approach holds up under FIA scrutiny, and that's a big if, it could render conventional combustion mapping strategies obsolete. Their engine's output doesn't just remain stable under race stress. It climbs. Marginally, but predictably. And while that may sound small in raw numbers, it means Red Bull could enter every race with an engine that quietly builds performance throughout a stint without triggering a single warning light on FIA oversight systems. That's the real genius and the real threat. Because the 2026 regulations, while detailed in some areas, leave enormous gray zones when it comes to how performance is delivered over time. Fuel mass flow is capped. Electric deployment is monitored. But mechanical changes that occur naturally under load? The rules don't address them. They can't. The Red Bull engine appears to weaponize those moments of ambiguity when the engine is hot, the oil is thin, the cylinder walls are expanding, and it uses that chaos to make more power. In a sport built around control, Red Bull has found an advantage hidden in natural instability. Audi and Mercedes have already begun quietly lobbying for a technical directive that would clarify the boundaries of thermal performance manipulation. But the FIA faces an impossible task: define a limit without directly invalidating Red Bull's engine before it even turns a wheel in anger. Do that, and they'll be accused of suppressing innovation. Stay silent, and Red Bull may walk into the next era with a mechanical trick no other team can legally match, because you can't copy what's been structurally built from day one. In this sport, the timing of innovation is everything. And Red Bull may have just nailed it. Ford's presence makes things even more complex. This engine represents their official re-entry into F1, and any perception of controversy, especially tied to a regulatory gray zone, could become a marketing issue. But it could also become an asset. If Red Bull's engine is cleared, and Ford branding sits on top of a power unit that delivers unmatched efficiency under race pressure, the reputational boost could be enormous. For Ford, the engine is more than a project. It's a global showcase. And no one wants that showcase buried under legal ambiguity before it even hits the track. And so the paddock waits. The FIA hasn't commented. Red Bull has stayed silent. The other teams are running simulations late into the night, trying to figure out just how big this advantage really is. But the truth is, no one knows yet. And that's what makes this more than a controversy. It's a warning sign. Because in Formula 1, when the fastest car is also the hardest to understand, that's when the sport becomes vulnerable. The first thing rival engineers noticed was the power curve. It wasn't linear. It bent upward mid-stint, suggesting a behavior no one had planned for. Normally, under race conditions, as heat builds within the engine block and combustion chambers, teams begin dialing back performance to protect component life. Red Bull's leaked data did the opposite. The deeper into a simulation run the engine went, the more efficient its combustion cycle became. It wasn't a boost. It was a subtle shift in how the engine responded to its own temperature. That small detail sent shockwaves through engine rooms across the grid. This behavior pointed to something more advanced than a software patch. The combustion maps were clearly responding to thermal inputs in real time, but not in the way teams usually optimize for protection or fuel saving. Red Bull's engine appeared to amplify its compression ratios under specific temperature conditions. That could only mean one thing: the engine's internal geometry was behaving differently at race temperature. Not because of a moving part, but because of heat-induced material expansion, a concept considered too volatile, too unpredictable to weaponize. Until now. What this means in practice is chilling. As cylinder pressure rises under extreme race conditions, Red Bull's engine appears to leverage that heat to seal combustion more effectively, increasing thermal efficiency without breaching fuel flow limits. This compression expansion effect is so subtle that, in most test cycles, it would be invisible. But over a full race stint, especially in hot climates or on high degradation tracks, the cumulative gain could be enormous. Not in single lap pace, but in consistency. In a sport measured in thousandths of a second, this kind of invisible endurance gain could be the deciding factor. And that's what terrifies rival teams. You can't design your engine to do this unless you start from scratch. This isn't about maps or fuels or secret settings. It's fundamental architecture. Red Bull would have had to anticipate the exact materials, thicknesses, tolerances, and degradation behaviors under race heat years in advance. That kind of planning means one thing: this isn't a fluke. It's the product of intentional design, carried out with terrifying precision. And unless rivals saw this coming in 2021, they are already 2 years behind, and with homologation looming, they may never catch up. Some engineers believe Red Bull may be exploiting a multi-material liner concept, using dissimilar expansion rates between cylinder materials to create a dynamic seal under load. Others point to the potential use of controlled microcrack expansion within piston crowns, something straight out of aerospace, where heat expansion is engineered to change fluid dynamics in flight. These ideas sound insane. And yet, the data fits. Not because Red Bull admitted it, but because nothing else explains the torque curve behavior. And that alone is causing panic, not curiosity. More disturbingly, the leak didn't reveal the entire system. Several maps were incomplete. Some simulation values were scrubbed. There were gaps where data should have been, leading some to believe this wasn't an accidental breach. It may have been a controlled leak. A signal. If Red Bull released a partial version of their engine's behavior, it would be the ultimate misdirection, trigger panic without revealing the crown jewels. And if that's true, then the other teams aren't reacting to Red Bull's final engine. They're reacting to its shadow. But the most unsettling takeaway isn't even technical, it's strategic. Because if this leak was intentional, it means Red Bull has complete confidence in what they've built. Not just from a performance standpoint, but from a regulatory one. They don't think the FIA can stop them. They've built something so embedded in mechanical behavior, so far outside the boundaries of software or electronics, that it lives in the one place no technical directive can reach, inside the laws of physics themselves. This is where the real drama begins, not with what Red Bull has built, but with what the FIA failed to anticipate. The 2026 engine regulations were drafted to usher in a new era of efficiency, sustainability, and balance. But balance only exists when the system can detect and respond to deviations. What this leak has exposed is that Red Bull's engine may not be a deviation, it may be an entirely new category of power unit behavior that slips beneath the regulatory radar. Not because it's hidden, but because the rules never imagined it. That's a far more dangerous situation than a technical breach. The regulations are loaded with caps fuel flow, MGUK energy delivery, fuel injection pressure, but they rely heavily on consistent behavior under controlled conditions. They assume that if you limit inputs and outputs, you control the system. But Red Bull's approach, if the leak is accurate, weaponizes change itself. Their power unit doesn't operate at a single efficiency level. It shifts as the engine's environment shifts, responding to heat, pressure, and component stress in a way that gives it more performance at the exact moment most engines begin to fade. And because this behavior is intrinsic to the materials, it's functionally invisible under the FIA's current monitoring tools. The FIA has never had to regulate engine behavior that changes mid-race due to thermal deformation. That kind of thing belongs in aerospace, not motorsport. But now it's here, and the tools used to enforce compliance may no longer be sufficient. What Red Bull may have created is the equivalent of a moving target, legal at every checkpoint, yet cumulatively beyond anything the rulebook was designed to contain. It's not about cheating. It's about exceeding the design assumptions of the regulatory structure. And that's far harder to solve. The problem is compounded by the FIA's historical reluctance to act preemptively. Unless a system produces a visible, repeatable competitive imbalance, they tend to wait before intervening. But that logic doesn't apply here. Because by the time this engine demonstrates its true advantage on track, it will be too late to stop it. Homologation locks these engines in place for 4 years. Once approved, the FIA cannot retroactively limit internal architecture unless there is overwhelming evidence of rule breaking. But in this case, there's no rule to break, just an absence of understanding. That's what makes this moment so perilous. If the FIA acts now, issuing a technical directive to define acceptable thermal behavior ranges or expansion coefficients, they risk being accused of targeting Red Bull specifically. And without a clear safety or sporting integrity violation, such a move could be seen as suppressing innovation. But if they don't act, and Red Bull's engine dominates the early races of 2026, the FIA will have effectively handed the championship to one team, not through bias, but through inaction. Either choice triggers consequences that could ripple through the sport for years. The real fear within the paddock isn't just Red Bull's potential pace, it's the precedent. If this type of mechanical advantage is allowed to stand, what comes next? Will teams start designing power units to exploit not just thermal expansion, but other gray zones, chemical coating behaviors, acoustic pressure optimization, or microvibration resonance? These are real technologies used in aviation and advanced manufacturing. If F1 engines become a race to find the next unwritten advantage, the rulebook loses its authority. The sport stops being about clever interpretation and starts being about who can exploit physics faster than the FIA can write regulations. And yet, even with all this swirling uncertainty, the most haunting possibility remains untouched. What if Red Bull's engineers anticipated this exact gray area, not by accident but by design? What if this entire strategy was built around the assumption that the FIA wouldn't act in time? That the rulebook would be too slow, too vague, too bureaucratic to respond? If that's the case, then this leak isn't just an engineering revelation, it's a political checkmate. And the FIA now faces a brutal choice: admit they were outplayed, or change the rules mid-game and face the fury of the most dominant team in modern F1 history.